London, 1831. London's rain fell like broken promises that night, the kind that washed away footprints, but not memories. In the grand residence of the Duke of Wexford, Lady Mary stood motionless by the window. Her reflection ghosted against the storm-lashed glass, cheeks hollow with 6 months of unspoken words. The servants had long retired. The house settled into midnight creaks and whispers. She traced her finger along the window pane, drawing invisible words he would never read. Behind her, the Duke's study door remained closed. Light spilled beneath it like liquid gold, as it had every night for months. 6 months of perfect appearances, 6 months of hollow smiles, 6 months of a marriage that existed only when others watched. Lady Mary gathered her shawl around her shoulders. The silk was Venetian, a wedding gift from him. So was the ring that now felt heavier than the globe itself. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight. Each chime echoed through the marble corridors like a funeral bell. It was time. Her trunks had been secretly dispatched earlier. A modest cottage awaited her in a coastal village far from London's prying eyes and wagging tongues. She had left no letter, no explanation. What words could possibly bridge the chasm between duty and desire? Between a man who spoke only of responsibilities and a woman who had once believed in love? Lady Mary took one last look at the study door. For a heartbeat, her resolve wavered. Then she turned away. The Duke of Wexford would wake to find his wife gone, his reputation intact, his duty unfulfilled, and the words she had meant to say would remain forever caught in her throat. Little did she know that silence could be more deafening than any scream. Little did she know that 6 months later, that silence would become more than metaphorical. And little did she know that the poison already coursing through her veins had been placed there by hands she trusted. As Lady Mary slipped into the rainy night, London's most exclusive gossip sheets were already setting their type for the morning edition. For what is a duchess's disappearance, if not the most delicious scandal of the season? 6 months later, Wexford House stood like a mausoleum to a marriage that had barely begun. The Duke of Wexford, Alexander Blackwood, moved through its cavernous rooms like a ghost haunting his own life. Servants scattered at his approach. Visitors cut their stays short. London whispered that grief had made him cruel, that abandonment had frozen whatever warmth once lived in those piercing gray eyes. They were wrong. It wasn't cruelty that drove him to pace the empty corridors at night. It was questions, endless, unanswerable questions. Why had she left without a word? What silent injury had he inflicted that deserved such a silent departure? And how had he failed to notice his own wife's unhappiness until the moment she vanished from his life? On this particular evening, Alexander stood in Mary's abandoned sitting room. 6 months, and he had forbidden anyone to change a thing. Her embroidery remained in its hoop. Books lay open to pages she would never finish. A half-written letter sat on her writing desk, the ink long dried. He had read it 100 times, searching for clues in the mundane description of a garden party. "Your Grace?" He turned to find his butler hovering in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. No one entered this room unbidden. "What is it, Matthews?" "The workers have begun the restoration of the East Wing, as you instructed." Alexander nodded curtly. The East Wing had been closed for decades. Opening it had been Mary's project. One of many dreams she had shared that he had put aside for more practical concerns. "And?" he prompted when Matthews hesitated. They found something, behind the wall of what would have been her Grace's new reading room. Alexander's heart stuttered. "What sort of something?" "A book, Your Grace. A journal, it appears." The butler extended a small leather volume, its pages swollen from years behind damp plaster. Alexander took it, with hands that refused to remain steady. The journal was not old. The leather was barely weathered. And on the first page, in handwriting he would know blindfolded, Mary Elizabeth Blackwood, Duchess of Wexford. His wife's private thoughts. The words she had never spoken to him. Alexander dismissed the butler with a curt nod and sank into Mary's favorite chair. The scent of her perfume, lavender and vanilla, had long faded. He opened the journal, both desperate to know and terrified to learn why she had left him. The first pages were domestic observations, plans for the house, notes on servants' performances. Then, 3 months before her departure, "I fear something is wrong with me. The headaches grow worse. The physician claims it is merely female hysteria, but I know my own body. A doesn't notice. He never looks at me long enough to see." Alexander's mouth went dry. He had noticed her pallor, her increased fatigue, but he had believed the doctor's assurances. Had he failed her, even in this? He turned page after page, watching through her words as her health deteriorated and his obliviousness continued. Then, on the last written page, dated the night she left, "When he discovers the truth, it will be too late. The damage is done. But I cannot bear to watch him learn how thoroughly he has been deceived. By them, by me. Forgiveness may come someday, but I shall not be here to receive it. When the music stops, there is only silence." Alexander closed the journal, his mind reeling. Deceived? By whom? And what did she mean by silence? The grandfather clock struck midnight, just as it had the night she left. In that moment, the Duke of Wexford made a decision that would scandalize London society and change the course of 2 broken lives. He would find his wife, and this time he would listen to whatever she had to say, even if she said nothing at all. Seaview village clung to the Cornwall cliffs like a collection of white seashells tossed by a careless giant. Far from London's rigid social hierarchies and endless gossip, it was a place where names mattered less than the skill of one's hands and the kindness in one's heart. Perfect for a duchess who wished to disappear. Miss Mary Elliot, as she was now known, had found unexpected purpose in this windswept hamlet. The cottage she rented overlooked the churning sea. Its garden burst with wildflowers no proper London landscape architect would have tolerated. And 3 days each week, the former Duchess of Wexford taught music to the village children. Not with her voice, for that had been silenced 2 months after her arrival. The local doctor had called it a mysterious inflammation of the throat. Temporary, he had promised. But Mary knew better. The symptoms had begun in London. The metallic taste, the burning throat, the slowly increasing difficulty in forming words. By the time she reached Cornwall, her voice emerged only as a painful rasp. Now it did not emerge at all. Yet she had found new ways to communicate. Her fingers spoke eloquently across piano keys. Her expressions and gestures conveyed what words could not. And her small students adored their silent, elegant teacher who listened, truly listened, as few adults ever did. "Miss Elliot! Miss Elliot!" Young Emma Trelawney burst into the music room, her 7-year-old face alight with excitement. Mary looked up from the sheet music she was arranging and raised a questioning eyebrow. "There's a grand carriage in the village, with matched horses and a crest on the door." Mary's hands froze on the piano keys. A crested carriage could mean only one thing. The aristocracy had come to Seaview, and there was only one nobleman who had reason to seek out this particular village. Mary's heart began to race. She had known this day might come, had prepared for it, or so she had thought. But now, facing the reality of Alexander's presence, she felt utterly defenseless. How could she explain what she could not speak? How could she warn him of dangers she barely understood herself? And how could she face the man whose indifference had broken her heart, now that her silence was no longer a choice, but a prison? Emma tugged at Mary's sleeve. "Miss Elliot, are you unwell? You've gone white as Daddy's Sunday shirt." Mary forced a smile and shook her head. She reached for the slate she kept nearby and wrote in her elegant hand, "I am well, dear. Please tell the others practice will begin shortly." As Emma skipped away, Mary moved to the window. In the village square below, a magnificent carriage had indeed drawn a crowd of curious onlookers. Even from this distance, she recognized the Wexford crest emblazoned on its glossy black door. And then he emerged. Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Wexford, looked leaner than she remembered. The Cornwall sun caught the new threads of silver at his temples, but his bearing remained unmistakable. The straight spine, the proud tilt of his head, the absolute confidence of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted, until she had denied him her presence. Mary stepped back from the window, one hand pressed to her silent throat. He had found her, but he would discover only half the woman he had married. For how could a duchess without a voice possibly explain why she had fled? Or warn him that whoever had poisoned her voice might not stop at mere silence? Alexander Blackwood had faced disapproving peers, financial crises, and even a duel in his 34 years. Yet nothing had prepared him for the sheer terror of walking into a village music school to face the wife who had fled from him. The children stared openly as he entered the small, sun-dappled room. A dozen pairs of curious eyes assessed his London clothes, his polished boots, his uncertain expression. But Alexander saw only one person. Mary stood by the piano, her back straight as a ship's mast. Her once elaborate coiffure had been replaced by a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Her gown was plain muslin, not the silks and satins of a duchess. Yet she had never looked more beautiful to him, or more unreachable. "Good afternoon," he said, his duke's voice sounding absurdly formal in this humble room. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The children continued to stare. Mary remained motionless, her eyes wide with emotions he couldn't begin to decipher. A small girl with ginger braids finally broke the silence. "Are you Miss Elliot's husband, sir?" The simplicity of the question nearly undid him. "Yes," he answered softly, "although we've been apart for some time." Mary's face paled further. She reached for a slate and wrote quickly, turning it to face the children. Alexander couldn't read the words from where he stood, but the effect was immediate. The children gathered their music and filed out, each curtsying or bowing awkwardly to him as they passed. The last child, the ginger-haired girl, paused at the door. "Miss Elliot can't talk anymore, sir, but she still hears just fine, and she's teaching me the pianoforte. I'm quite good already." Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Alexander and Mary stood facing each other across 6 months of silence and the width of a modest schoolroom. "You've lost your voice," he said finally. It wasn't at all what he had planned to say. He had rehearsed speeches during the entire journey from London, demands for explanations, pleas for reconciliation. None of them had accounted for this development. Mary nodded once, her hand moving unconsciously to her throat. "Is it?" He hesitated, remembering the journal entries about her declining health. "Is it because of what was happening in London, before you left?" Another nod, more hesitant. Alexander took a step toward her, then stopped when she tensed. "I found your journal, the one hidden in the east wing wall. Not all of it made sense to me, but enough to know you were ill, that you believed someone had deceived us both." Mary's eyes widened. She reached for the slate again and wrote rapidly. When she held it up, he read, "You should not have come. It isn't safe." "Safe? Mary, what aren't you telling me? Who hurt you?" She shook her head vehemently and wrote again. "I cannot explain everything. Not here, not now. Please, Alexander, return to London. Forget you found me." "Forget?" His voice rose despite his best intentions. "I've spent 6 months with nothing but memories and questions. 6 months wondering what I did to drive you away without so much as a farewell. And now I find you like this, afraid and silenced, and you expect me to simply leave?" The slate clattered to the floor as Mary pressed both hands to her face. For a terrible moment, Alexander thought she was weeping. Then her shoulders straightened, and she faced him with dry eyes and a resolute expression he remembered well from their brief marriage. She retrieved the slate and wrote, "Tonight, my cottage, after sunset. Come alone and tell no one why you're in Seaview." Then she turned away, clearly dismissing him. Alexander wanted to protest, to demand answers immediately. Instead, he found himself bowing formally as though they were at a London ballroom rather than a village schoolhouse. Until tonight, then. As he turned to leave, a small sound made him pause. Not a voice, not words, but a single, perfect note from the piano. Mary stood with one finger on the key, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time. And in that single, pure tone, Alexander heard more than in all the conversations of their marriage. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But perhaps it was a beginning. The cottage garden was a riot of untamed beauty in the golden evening light. Hollyhocks reached skyward like the spires of natural cathedrals. Lavender scented the air with each breeze. Roses climbed the whitewashed walls with cheerful disregard for proper boundaries. So unlike the formal gardens at Wexford House, where every bloom knew its place and dared not stray. Alexander paused at the gate, suddenly uncertain. This was Mary's domain, not the gilded cage he had provided, but a home she had chosen for herself. He had no right to enter unbidden. As if sensing his presence, the cottage door opened. Mary stood framed in warm lamplight, wearing a simple blue gown that reminded him of the sky just before dusk. She beckoned him in with a graceful gesture that spoke as clearly as words. The interior was smaller than his London dressing room, yet somehow contained more genuine comfort than his entire ancestral home. Books spilled from modest shelves. A small fire danced in the hearth. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air. It felt lived in. Loved. Mary directed him to a chair with a wave and disappeared briefly into another room. She returned carrying a tray with tea and 2 slices of cake. After setting it down, she took a leather-bound book from a nearby table and opened it to a blank page. Alexander realized it was not a book, but a portable writing tablet. "I have many questions for you as well," she wrote. "But first, tell me why you came." Her handwriting was as elegant as he remembered, the words less so. "Because you left without explanation," he said simply. "Because for 6 months I've been half alive, trying to understand what drove you away." Mary's eyebrows rose skeptically. Alexander felt a flush of anger. "You doubt me? You think I didn't notice your absence every day? That I didn't search?" She wrote quickly. "You barely noticed my presence when I lived under your roof, and if you searched, you found me rather slowly." The accusation stung precisely because it contained truth. "I didn't know where to look," he admitted. "You left no clues, no correspondence with friends. It was as if you simply ceased to exist. That was the intention." "Why?" The question erupted from somewhere deep and wounded. "What did I do that was so terrible you needed to disappear entirely?" Mary stared at him for a long moment. Then she wrote, "It was not what you did. It was what you failed to do." Which was? "See me, hear me, love me beyond my usefulness as your Duchess." Alexander felt as if she had struck him. "I married you. I gave you my name, my protection, everything that was in my power to give. Everything except yourself." The words, so simply written, laid bare the emptiness at the heart of their marriage. He had married her because she was suitable, accomplished, well-bred. He had never considered that she might want more than his title and position, that she might want his heart. "I didn't know how," he said finally, the admission painful. "My parents' marriage was a business arrangement. I never learned." Mary's expression softened slightly. She wrote, "I know. I didn't leave because I stopped caring for you. I left because I couldn't bear to watch you not care for me." Alexander leaned forward, suddenly desperate to make her understand. "But I did care. I do care. Why else would I be here?" Perhaps for the same reason any man seeks what has been taken from him. Pride. "This isn't about pride." He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "This is about finding the other half of myself, about making right what I made wrong, about understanding why my wife fled in the night and then lost her voice." Mary went very still. Then slowly she wrote, "What exactly did my journal say?" Alexander tried to recall the exact words. "That you feared something was wrong with you, that the doctor dismissed your concerns, that you believed we had both been deceived, though you didn't say by whom." She nodded, her expression grave. "I began to suspect I was being poisoned," she wrote. "Small amounts, over time. The symptoms were subtle at first, headaches, metallic taste. then difficulty speaking. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. Poisoned? By whom? And why didn't you tell me? I tried. You were always too busy, too distracted, and when I finally had proof, I discovered something worse. What could be worse than learning your wife was being poisoned? Mary's hand trembled as she wrote, learning that the poison came from your own household, that it bore your family crest. Alexander stared at the words, uncomprehending. My family crest? You can't mean... I found the vial in your study, hidden in a secret compartment of your desk, the same desk where you keep the special brandy you drink each night. That's impossible. I've never... But even as he denied it, a terrible suspicion began to form. The brandy, his inexplicable health issues over the past year, the increasing irritability that had driven him to avoid Mary in the first place. They had both been targets. Mary, he whispered, I never knew. I would never harm you. She studied his face for a long moment, then wrote, I believe you, but someone wanted you to appear guilty. Someone with access to your private study. Someone who knew our marriage was already strained. But who would benefit from poisoning us both? From driving us apart? Mary's answer was swift and certain. Whoever stands to inherit if you die without an heir. Alexander sank back into his chair, the implications crashing over him like a wave. My cousin, he said flatly. George would become Duke if I died childless. Mary nodded, her expression grim. I fled to protect you, to draw the culprit into the open. But I underestimated the damage already done to my voice. By the time I reached Cornwall, I could barely speak. 2 weeks later, I couldn't speak at all. And you've been here ever since, alone, vulnerable. Not vulnerable, she corrected. Unknown, until today. The implication was clear. His arrival had shattered her carefully constructed anonymity. We're not safe here, he said. If George learns I've found you... Mary's hand moved across the page with sudden urgency. We're not safe anywhere. Not until we have proof, and the only proof is at Wexford House. For the first time since entering the cottage, Alexander smiled. A dangerous smile that reminded Mary why the Blackwood men had survived centuries of court intrigue. Then we shall return to London, he said. Together, publicly. Let the world think I've reclaimed my errant wife, while privately, we hunt a poisoner. He took her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. And perhaps, along the way, discover if there's anything worth salvaging between us. Mary didn't write a response, but she didn't need to. The slight pressure of her fingers against his spoke volumes that even her lost voice couldn't have articulated. Hope. Tentative as the first spring crocus, but hope nonetheless. London hummed with scandalized excitement. The Duke of Wexford had returned from his mysterious country sojourn with his long-absent Duchess on his arm. And oh, what delicious details accompanied their reappearance. The Duchess, it was whispered, had lost her voice to a mysterious ailment. She communicated now through written notes and elegant gestures. The Duke, once known for his aloofness, now barely left her side, watching her with the intensity of a man either deeply in love or deeply suspicious. And wasn't it curious that Cousin George, the presumptive heir, had suddenly become a fixture at Wexford House after years of strained relations? They're watching us, Alexander murmured as he escorted Mary through the crowded ballroom of Lady Harrington's spring gala. Every eye, every whisper. Mary nodded almost imperceptibly. She had known it would be this way. London society fed on scandal the way other creatures required air. Their return, her condition, provided a feast of speculation. She touched Alexander's arm lightly and flicked her gaze meaningfully toward the refreshment table. George Blackwood stood there, outwardly the picture of aristocratic boredom. But Mary didn't miss how his eyes tracked their movements, sharp with calculation. I see him, Alexander said quietly. He's been exceedingly solicitous since our return. Brings you throat remedies daily, doesn't he? Mary's smile was tight. Those remedies were promptly disposed of in the garden, feeding nothing more valuable than the rose bushes. She had been handling the charade better than expected. The role of the silent, recuperating Duchess suited her purposes. It allowed her to observe, to listen when others forgot her presence, to watch George's growing frustration as Alexander showed no signs of the mysterious illness that had plagued him before her departure. Because Alexander no longer drank the special brandy kept in his study, no longer ate separately from her, served by George's recommended footman. Instead, husband and wife dined together privately, served only by Matthew's and Mary's trusted lady's maid. A necessary precaution, but also, unexpectedly, a revelation. Without the distraction of poisoned food and the irritability it caused, Alexander was proving to be a very different husband than she remembered. He spoke to her, really spoke, over their quiet dinners, asked her opinions, listened to her written responses with genuine interest, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. Ah, Wexford! And the lovely, silent Duchess. George's voice cut through Mary's reflections. He approached them with the confident smile of a man who believed himself above suspicion. Cousin, Alexander acknowledged coolly. Enjoying the festivities? As much as one can enjoy watching the same people dance the same dances to the same music, George replied with practiced boredom. Though I must say, your return has added a certain piquancy to the season. His gaze shifted to Mary, false concern dripping from every word. And how fares your throat this evening, Duchess? Any improvement? I brought another tonic from that specialist I mentioned. Mary smiled blandly and shook her head, gesturing to her throat with a regretful expression. My wife appreciates your concern, Alexander said smoothly. But her doctor advises complete vocal rest, no remedies, no attempts to speak. George's smile remained fixed, but Mary saw the flash of annoyance in his eyes. How unfortunate. And how long does this vocal rest need to continue? Indefinitely, Alexander replied. But we've adjusted admirably, haven't we, my dear? Mary nodded, her hand resting possessively on Alexander's arm. The gesture was not lost on George, nor was the protective way Alexander covered her hand with his own. Indeed, George said finally. Well, family must support family in difficult times. Speaking of which, might I have a word in private, cousin? Estate matters that require attention. Alexander hesitated, and Mary felt his instinctive reluctance to leave her alone. She gave him a reassuring nod. This was part of their plan, after all, to separate briefly, to give George the opportunity to approach her while Alexander took the chance to search George's town residence. Very well, Alexander agreed, but briefly. I promised my wife a waltz, and the Duke of Wexford keeps his promises. The words held a double meaning that made George's smile falter slightly. As the men moved away, Mary felt a momentary pang of fear. Not for herself. She had taken precautions, wearing gloves and carrying no food or drink near her lips, but for Alexander, walking away with the man who had systematically tried to destroy them both. She forced herself to circulate, nodding graciously to acquaintances who approached with barely concealed curiosity about her condition. Lady Harrington, ever the attentive hostess, hovered nearby. My dear Duchess, how brave you are to face society in your condition, she simpered. Such a mysterious ailment. One wonders what could possibly cause such a specific affliction. Mary raised an eyebrow and removed the small notebook she now carried everywhere. She wrote swiftly, perhaps the same thing that causes specific curiosity. A toxic environment. Lady Harrington's cheeks flushed. I never. I was merely expressing concern. Mary smiled sweetly and wrote, and I was merely expressing gratitude for such concern. Did you interpret it otherwise? Before the flustered hostess could respond, a commotion at the ballroom entrance drew everyone's attention. Alexander had returned, his expression thunderous. Behind him, George followed, outwardly calm, but with a tightness around his eyes that spoke of barely controlled fury. Something had happened in their brief absence. Alexander strode directly to Mary, ignoring the whispers that followed him across the ballroom. We're leaving, he said quietly, offering his arm. Mary took it without hesitation, feeling the tension radiating through him. As they made their farewells and moved toward the exit, George called after them. "Remember what I said, cousin. Blood tells in the end." Alexander didn't turn, but his grip on Mary's arm tightened. Only when they were safely in their carriage did he speak. "I found it," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Exactly where you suspected. A laboratory of sorts in George's cellar, vials of clear liquid, detailed notes on symptoms and dosages." Mary's eyes widened. She reached for her notebook. "Did you take anything? Proof we can show the authorities?" Alexander's smile was grim. "Better. I replaced one vial with colored water. When he discovers the switch, he'll know we're onto him. And a guilty man who feels cornered is a man who makes mistakes. Or becomes more dangerous," Mary wrote, her hand trembling slightly. "Precisely why we're not returning to Wexford House tonight." Mary frowned in confusion. "I've had Matthews prepare the hunting lodge in Richmond," Alexander explained. "A precaution I took before we even left for the ball. No servants except those I trust implicitly. No access except through paths I control." "You anticipated this?" "I anticipated that tonight would change the game, one way or another." He took her hand, his expression softening. "I won't risk you again, Mary. Not when I've only just begun to know the woman I married." The admission hung between them in the darkened carriage. Not quite a declaration, but perhaps a beginning. Mary squeezed his hand in response. As their carriage rolled away from Mayfair's glittering ballrooms toward the sanctuary of Richmond, neither noticed the second carriage that pulled away from the curb to follow at a discreet distance. The game had indeed changed, and the most dangerous moves were yet to come. The hunting lodge nestled among ancient oaks like a secret the forest kept. Dawn painted its weathered stone in hues of amber and rose as Mary stood at the window, watching mist rise from the surrounding woods. It was beautiful, peaceful, as removed from London's calculated elegance as the night sky from a chandelier's glitter. Yet peace eluded her. Alexander had barely slept, spending much of the night writing letters, dispatching trusted messengers, and methodically cleaning the pistol he now wore openly at his hip. The casual Duke was gone. In his place stood a man prepared for battle. Mary turned from the window as he entered the lodge's small but comfortable sitting room. He looked tired but resolute. "Matthews will arrive by midday with additional supplies and men I trust," he said without preamble. "By evening, we'll have proper protection here." Mary nodded and reached for her notebook. "Any word from London?" "My sources say George left Lady Harrington's ball shortly after we did. He returned to his townhouse briefly, then departed again before midnight." Alexander's expression was grim. "His current whereabouts are unknown. He knows we suspect him. Yes, the question is whether he'll run or retaliate." Mary wrote slowly, carefully. "He can't afford to run. If he flees now, it's an admission of guilt. He loses any chance at the dukedom." "Agreed. Which means we should prepare for the worst." She studied her husband's face, noting the new lines of strain around his eyes. This protective, strategic man was yet another side of Alexander she had never glimpsed during their brief London marriage. "I'm sorry," she wrote suddenly. Alexander looked startled. "For what?" "For not trusting you enough to tell you my suspicions before I fled. For not giving you the chance to be the man you're being now." His expression softened. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "And I'm sorry I gave you no reason to trust me. That I was so consumed by duty and position that I never saw the treasure right before me." Mary felt tears threaten. 6 months ago, she would have given anything to hear those words. Now, with danger circling them like wolves around a campfire, they felt both precious and precarious. A sharp knock at the door made them both tense. Alexander motioned her to stand behind him as he approached the entrance, one hand on his pistol. "Who comes?" he called. "It's Matthews, Your Grace. Alone, as instructed." Alexander relaxed slightly, but still opened the door with caution. The butler entered, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His usually immaculate livery was travel-stained, his expression harried. "Your Grace, my lady." He bowed. "I regret I come with grave news rather than the supplies you requested." Alexander's posture stiffened. What's happened? Wexford House was breached in the night. Your study was ransacked. By George? Matthews shook his head. By persons unknown, though one can surmise, but that's not the worst of it, I'm afraid. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. This was left on your desk, addressed to the Duchess. Mary took the paper with trembling fingers. As she unfolded it, a small object fell to the floor. A button. Silver, engraved with tiny flowers. She recognized it instantly. It had come from her favorite nightgown, left behind the night she fled. The note contained just 3 lines. Silence becomes you, Cousin Mary. But some things should remain buried, like unwanted duchesses who know too much. Mary felt the blood drain from her face. She handed the note to Alexander, who read it with growing fury. He threatens you openly now, he said, his voice dangerously soft. There's more, Your Grace, Matthews continued reluctantly. Lord George has filed papers with the Lord Chancellor claiming the Duchess is mentally unsound, that her disappearance and subsequent muteness are symptoms of hysteria, not poisoning. He suggests she poses a danger to herself and the Wexford line. On what grounds? Alexander demanded. He presents letters, apparently from the Duchess to various lovers, written before and during your marriage. Mary gasped silently, shaking her head in vehement denial. Forgeries, Alexander stated flatly. My wife has been nothing but faithful. Matthews nodded. Undoubtedly forgeries, Your Grace, but convincing ones, according to my sources, and with the Duchess unable to verbally defend herself, the implication hung heavily in the air. Mary reached for her notebook with shaking hands. He means to have me declared incompetent, institutionalized, silenced permanently. I won't allow it, Alexander declared. I still have influence, friends in government who will delay any hearing. For how long? And what of your reputation? The scandal could ruin you. Alexander's laugh held no humor. My reputation? When my wife's life is threatened? When my cousin has poisoned us both and committed fraud? His vehemence startled her. This was not the proper, controlled duke she had married. This was a man transformed by crisis, and perhaps by something else entirely. Matthews, Alexander continued, return to London immediately. Deliver the letters I prepared last night to these addresses. He handed the butler a sealed packet. Then proceed as we discussed regarding the evidence at George's residence. The butler bowed. And shall I implement the additional security measures here, Your Grace? No, plans have changed. Alexander's expression was resolute. The lodge is no longer secure if George knows of its existence. We'll leave within the hour. Mary looked up in alarm. Leave? For where? Somewhere George would never think to look for a duke and duchess, Alexander replied. Somewhere we can regroup while my allies in London work to expose him. Matthews cleared his throat. If I might make a suggestion, Your Grace, my sister's farm near Dover. Remote, defensible, and completely disconnected from the Wexford holdings. Alexander nodded. Perfect. Make the arrangements, but tell no one, not even my solicitor, of our destination. As Matthews departed to prepare for their journey, Mary touched Alexander's arm to gain his attention. You don't have to do this, she wrote. This is my battle as much as yours. I could disappear again, draw him away from you. Alexander's expression softened. He cupped her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart ache. Haven't we spent enough time apart? Haven't we both suffered enough for my blindness and your pride? Mary couldn't help but lean into his touch. Besides, he continued with the ghost of a smile, I find I'm rather looking forward to shocking society by taking up farming alongside my remarkable wife. The joke, weak as it was, broke the tension. Mary managed a small smile in return. I don't know how to farm, she wrote. I'm not even particularly good at gardening. Then we shall fail spectacularly together, he responded. But we shall do it together, if you'll have me. It wasn't the romantic declaration young Mary had once dreamed of. It offered no guarantees, no passionate avowals. Yet somehow, in this moment of danger and uncertainty, it felt more genuine than any flowery speech could have been. Mary nodded slowly. Then, deliberately, she raised herself on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. Their first real kiss in over 6 months. Perhaps, if they survived what was coming, not their last. Dawn broke over the Dover cliffs with spectacular indifference to human troubles. The Matthews family farm, 4 weathered buildings surrounded by fields of barley and sheep pastures, had become home to its most unlikely residents yet. A duke who had never sown a seed, a duchess who could not call out commands, and a newfound understanding growing between them like wildflowers after rain. "You're laughing at me," Alexander accused good-naturedly as he returned from the barn, straw clinging to his once immaculate clothing. Mary, sitting on a rough wooden bench outside the farmhouse, didn't deny it. Her shoulders shook with silent mirth as she took in his disheveled appearance. 2 weeks in the country had transformed the austere Duke of Wexford. His skin had bronzed under the coastal sun. His hands, once smooth from a lifetime of privilege, now bore calluses from honest work. She wrote in her ever-present notebook, "The sheep are clearly winning this battle of wills." "Stubborn creatures," he agreed, dropping onto the bench beside her. "Rather like duchesses who refuse to admit when they're tired." Mary raised an eyebrow in mock offense, but didn't argue. The truth was, she was exhausted. Though they had found unexpected peace in this simple place, anxiety stalked their days. Each sunrise brought the question, was this the day George would find them? Each night, Alexander checked and rechecked the farmhouse's modest defenses before joining Mary in their small, shared bedroom. They slept side by side now, his arm protectively around her waist, but nothing more. Both were healing, from poison, from mistrust, from the weight of nobility's expectations. Both were waiting for news from London, where Matthews orchestrated their defense from the shadows. And both were discovering, in this enforced simplicity, the connection they had never found amid London's opulence. "Any word from Matthews?" she wrote now. Alexander shook his head. "Nothing since Tuesday's note, but that's good news in itself. If George had made a significant move, we'd know." Mary nodded, though the waiting gnawed at her. "Do you ever wonder," she wrote slowly, "what might have happened if we'd started like this? Without titles and expectations? Just a man and woman learning each other?" Alexander considered her question seriously, as he now did all her written thoughts. "I think," he said finally, "that I would have fallen in love with you much sooner, and much more irrevocably." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned as the farmhouse itself. Mary's breath caught. It was the first time either had spoken or written of love. Before she could respond, hoofbeats sounded on the lane leading to the farm. Alexander was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the pistol he kept at his waist. "Inside," he said tersely. "If it's trouble, use the back door as we planned. Run for the cliffs." Mary nodded, but made no move to leave. Whatever came, she would face it at his side. The rider came into view, a lathered horse bearing Matthew's young groom, Tom. "Your Grace!" the boy called, sliding from his mount. "Urgent news from London!" Alexander relaxed slightly, but kept his hand near his weapon. "Speak then." "Mr. Matthews sends word. Lord George has fled London after papers were filed with the magistrate. Evidence of the poisoning was delivered anonymously to authorities. There's a warrant for his arrest." Relief flooded through Mary. Alexander's shoulders dropped their tension. "Fled where?" he asked. Tom's expression grew grim. "That's the urgent part, Your Grace. Intelligence suggests he's headed this way, toward Dover. Mr. Matthews doesn't know if he's discovered your location, but we must assume the worst," Alexander finished. "When was this information received?" "Yesterday evening, Your Grace. I rode through the night." Mary exchanged an alarmed glance with Alexander. George could be hours behind this messenger. She wrote quickly, "We should leave immediately." Alexander shook his head. "No. If he's tracked us this far, he'll follow wherever we go. Better to make our stand here, where we know the terrain." He turned to Tom. "Did Matthews send reinforcements?" 3 men follow a half-day behind me, Your Grace. Former soldiers from your father's regiment." Good. That gives us time to prepare. Alexander's expression hardened into the ducal authority Mary had once found so intimidating. Now it reassured her. Tom, stable your horse, then secure the perimeter as Matthews taught you. Mary, help me gather what weapons we have. We're about to host a most unwelcome visitor. As they moved with purpose toward the farmhouse, Mary touched Alexander's arm to stop him. She wrote hastily, "Before whatever happens next, you should know. I have fallen irrevocably too." Alexander read the words, then pulled her to him in a fierce embrace. For a moment they stood together in the morning sunlight, a duke and duchess in farmer's clothing, finding truth in the shadow of danger. Then they separated, duty calling them to prepare for the storm that approached. A storm named George, who would not rest until one of them was silenced permanently. Dusk settled over the farm like a held breath. Alexander positioned Tom at the rear of the property, watching the path that wound down from the higher fields. He himself took the front approach, where the main road curved toward the farmhouse. Mary remained inside, against her wishes. Her inability to call out warnings made her a liability in their defensive strategy, Alexander had argued. She had conceded the point, but not without writing a blistering critique of his high-handedness that had made him smile despite the circumstances. That smile had faded quickly when they'd discovered a crucial fact. George had not come alone. Mid-afternoon reconnaissance had spotted 3 riders approaching Dover, making inquiries in the village about recent arrivals to the area. Hired muscle, Alexander had concluded grimly. He knows he can't face us, face me, without advantage. Now, as twilight deepened into night, the farmhouse stood dark and seemingly deserted. Only a single candle burned in an upstairs room, a deliberate lure. An empty bed made to look occupied. Mary waited in the root cellar beneath the kitchen, a loaded pistol in her lap. Not her choice of sanctuary, but the most defensible position if all else failed. Alexander had shown her how to use the weapon with a few terse instructions. Her hands had trembled, but her eyes were resolute. She had survived poison and silence. She would survive this too. Above her, the farmhouse creaked and settled in the cooling night air. She counted heartbeats, straining to hear any sound of approach. Then, a muffled thud, a low curse, footsteps moving stealthily across the wooden floor above. Not Alexander's familiar tread, someone trying to remain undetected. Mary gripped the pistol tighter, eyes fixed on the cellar door at the top of the rough wooden stairs. Minutes stretched like hours. More sounds filtered down, the scrape of furniture being moved, a hushed voice giving directions, then silence again, until the door to the cellar opened with agonizing slowness. Mary raised the pistol, finger tensed on the trigger. A figure appeared, silhouetted against the faint starlight from the kitchen window. "Mary?" Alexander's whisper sent relief flooding through her. "It's clear. You can come up now." She lowered the weapon and made her way carefully up the stairs. The kitchen was empty, showing signs of having been searched. Drawers stood open. A chair lay overturned. Alexander's face was taut with controlled tension. Tom spotted them approaching from the west. 3 men with George. They've split up to surround the house. Mary reached for her notebook, but Alexander shook his head. "No time. They'll be back any moment. We need to move." He led her quickly through the darkened house toward the front door. Outside, the night was clear and star-filled, incongruously beautiful for such danger. Alexander guided her toward the barn, keeping to the shadows. They had almost reached it when a voice called from behind them. "Leaving so soon, cousin? Without even a proper greeting?" They turned slowly to find George Blackwood standing 20 paces away, a pistol aimed directly at them. His elegant attire looked absurdly out of place in the farmyard. "George," Alexander acknowledged coldly, "I see you've abandoned London society. The climate become too hot for you?" George's smile was reptilian, merely a strategic retreat. "Unlike your rather pathetic attempt at playing farmer." "Where are your hired men?" Alexander asked, subtly positioning himself between Mary and George. "Securing the perimeter, looking for your little messenger boy." George's gaze slid to Mary. Cousin Mary, still maintaining your convenient muteness, I see. Such a perfect way to avoid answering difficult questions." Mary lifted her chin defiantly. Alexander felt a surge of pride at her courage. "The authorities already have the evidence, George," he said. "Your laboratory, the poison, it's over." "Evidence that could belong to anyone," George replied dismissively. "Without testimony connecting it to me, it's merely suspicious items in a townhouse I rarely visit." "And the forged letters? The attempt to have my wife declared incompetent?" George shrugged. "Unfortunate misunderstandings. Easily explained away once I returned to London as the concerned cousin of a duke tragically killed by outlaws while hiding his deranged Duchess in the countryside." The casual way he outlined their murder sent ice through Alexander's veins. "You'll never succeed," he said. "Too many people know the truth now." "Do they?" George's smile widened. "Your trusted Matthews lies unconscious in your London home. Your allies have received evidence that the Duchess was poisoning you, not the other way around. A desperate woman trying to secure her position before you could cast her aside for infidelity." Mary made a small, strangled sound of outrage. "You see," George continued, "when you began investigating me, I started creating a counter-narrative, one that will seem perfectly plausible once you're both unable to contradict it." Alexander felt Mary tense beside him. Her hand slipped into his, squeezing once. A signal. But for what? Then he noticed her other hand making a subtle gesture toward the barn door behind George. A shadow moved there. Tom, positioning himself for a clear shot. Alexander needed to keep George talking. "Why, George? We're family. I've never been anything but generous to you." "Generous?" George spat the word. "You've been condescending. The mighty Duke and his poor relation. Always reminding me of my inferior position with your supposed kindness." His voice rose with years of pent-up resentment. "I am a Blackwood too. I have the same blood, the same right to the title. But an accident of birth put you in Wexford House while I scraped by on your leavings. So you decided to poison us both? To destroy my marriage? For a title? For what should have been mine from the beginning?" George's eyes glittered with malice. "And it almost worked. If she hadn't fled," he jerked his head toward Mary, "you would have drunk yourself into an early grave, your mind clouded by the poison, never suspecting your loyal cousin who nursed you through your mysterious illness." As he spoke, his attention focused entirely on Alexander, the pistol unwavering. Mary saw their chance. With deliberate precision, she shifted her foot and kicked a loose stone toward the shadows beyond George. The small sound was enough to make him turn slightly, his concentration broken for a crucial moment. Alexander lunged forward, driving his shoulder into George's chest. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the air as both men crashed to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, George's aristocratic veneer dissolving into animal desperation as he clawed and bit. Alexander had strength and righteous fury on his side, but George fought with the manic energy of a cornered predator. A knife appeared in George's hand, a slim, deadly blade that slashed toward Alexander's throat. He jerked back barely in time, feeling the sting as it grazed his cheek instead. Mary watched in horror, unable to call for help, unable to intervene without risking Alexander's life as well. Tom had emerged from the shadows, but the men's bodies were too entangled for him to risk a shot. Then Mary saw it. George's discarded pistol, lying in the dirt just feet from her. She dove for the weapon, her fingers closing around its ornate grip. It was heavier than the one Alexander had given her, its balance unfamiliar. But its purpose was clear enough. She raised it, hands steady now, and aimed at the struggling figures. For one terrible moment, she couldn't distinguish between them in the darkness. Then Alexander rolled clear, pinned beneath him a cursing, writhing George. "Do it, Mary!" Alexander gasped, blood streaming from the cut on his cheek. "End this." George's eyes widened as he realized she held his own weapon. "You can't," he sneered. "You're too soft, too weak. You couldn't even speak up to save your own marriage." Mary's finger tightened on the trigger. One shot would end the nightmare, would ensure their safety, would make her a killer. She looked into George's eyes and saw not just malice, but fear. The desperate fear of a man who had gambled everything and lost. Slowly, deliberately, Mary lowered the pistol. Then, to the astonishment of all three men, she opened her mouth. The sound that emerged was rough, painful, barely recognizable as speech, but unmistakable in its meaning. "Enough," she rasped, the single word burning her throat like fire. "Enough, death." The shock of hearing her voice, any voice, after months of silence froze the tableau. In that moment, shouts and hoofbeats announced the arrival of Matthew's promised reinforcements. 3 uniformed men thundered into the farmyard, weapons drawn. George slumped in defeat beneath Alexander's grip. It was over. As the former soldiers secured George and located his hired men, Alexander rushed to Mary's side. "You spoke," he said in wonder, cupping her face as if she were made of precious crystal. "How?" Mary winced at the pain in her throat, but managed to whisper, "Had to. Worth it. To stop more poison." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "The greatest poison was the silence between us, a silence I helped create." She nodded in acknowledgement of this truth. Then, with effort, forced out more painful words. "New beginning, if you want it." Alexander gathered her gently into his arms, mindful of her weakened state. "I want it," he said simply. "I want you, not the Duchess, not the silent, perfect wife. You, Mary, with your voice or without it. In London or on this farm or wherever we choose to build our life." She rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, strong and steady and true. Like the love that had survived poison, silence, and betrayal. Like the truth that had finally found voice between them. 1 year later. London hummed with the excitement of another season. Debutantes twirled at balls under the watchful eyes of ambitious mothers. Gentlemen wagered at their clubs on everything from horse races to political appointments. And the scandal sheets devoured each morsel of aristocratic indiscretion with insatiable appetite. But the story they hungered for most remained tantalizingly out of reach. The true tale of the Duke and Duchess of Wexford. Oh, the facts were known well enough. The Duchess's mysterious disappearance and return. Lord George Blackwood's arrest and conviction for attempted murder by poison, now serving his sentence in the colonies. The Duchess's slow recovery of her voice, still husky but growing stronger each day. And perhaps most intriguing of all, the Duke and Duchess's decision to divide their time between Wexford House and their newly acquired estate in Dover. A decision that raised aristocratic eyebrows and sparked whispers of eccentricity. What London society couldn't fathom, what the gossips failed to grasp, was the transformation that had occurred beneath these visible changes. They couldn't see Mary standing before a small village music school, her voice clear enough now to lead 20 children in simple songs. They missed Alexander in shirt sleeves, helping local farmers bring in the harvest on lands he now owned not as a distant lord, but as a working member of the community. They weren't present for the quiet evenings when husband and wife sat by their fire, reading aloud to each other in a simple ritual that celebrated her recovered voice and his newly discovered capacity for stillness. And they certainly weren't privy to the intimate moments when Alexander traced the lines of Mary's body in wondering discovery, whispering apologies for his blindness and promises for their future. But on this particular evening, a small part of that private world would be glimpsed by select members of London society. Wexford House blazed with light, its ballroom opened for the first time since the scandal. A musical evening, intimate by ton standards. Merely 100 guests instead of the usual 500. Mary stood before the assembled company, elegantly gowned but without the excessive ornamentation she had once hidden behind. Alexander watched from nearby, his pride evident in every line of his posture. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mary began, her voice still carrying the slight raspiness that had become her signature. "Thank you for joining us tonight. Music has been my solace, my voice when words failed, and now my celebration of healing." She moved to the pianoforte and seated herself with graceful confidence. "This piece I composed during the months of my silence. It is called simply Restoration. Her fingers moved across the keys, drawing forth a melody that began in minor chords, haunting, questioning, searching. Gradually, it transformed, finding its way to major harmonies that spoke of discovery and joy. Alexander closed his eyes, hearing in the music the story of their journey, the separation, the danger, the rediscovery, the love that had always existed beneath the trappings of nobility and duty, waiting only for truth to give it voice. When Mary finished playing, the silence was profound. Then applause erupted, genuine and moved. Later, as guests departed and the house quieted, Alexander found Mary in their private sitting room, a space they had redesigned together, blending his preference for classic elegance with her love of comfort and light. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, sitting beside her on the small sofa they often shared. "How does your throat feel after so much talking?" "A little raw," she admitted, "but wonderfully used." He smiled at that. "Like our second chance." Exactly like that. Alexander took her hand, his expression turning serious. "I had a letter from the prison chaplain today. George wishes to see us." Mary tensed slightly. Even now, her cousin-in-law's name brought back shadows of fear. "Why?" "He claims remorse, wishes to make amends before his ship sails for Australia next month." She considered this. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know," Alexander admitted. "A year ago, I would have dismissed it as another manipulation. But now you've seen how people can change," Mary finished. "How we changed." "Precisely." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "We should see him, not for his sake, but for ours, to close that chapter completely." Alexander nodded, unsurprised by her compassion. It was one of the qualities he had failed to notice in their first attempt at marriage. One of many. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A small token of today's anniversary." "Anniversary?" Mary looked confused. "Our wedding was in May." "Not that anniversary." He handed her a small velvet box. "Today marks 1 year since you spoke again, since you chose mercy over vengeance, the day I consider the true beginning of our marriage." Mary opened the box to find a locket. Inside was not the expected miniature portrait, but a small piece of parchment bearing a musical phrase, the opening notes of her composition. "Alexander," she breathed. "It's perfect." "Not quite as perfect as the composer," he replied, drawing her close. "The woman who taught a duty-bound duke how to listen, how to see beyond appearance, how to love." Mary leaned into his embrace, marveling at how far they had traveled from the proper distant couple they had once been. "We were fortunate," she said softly. "Not everyone gets a second movement in their symphony." Alexander brushed his lips against her temple. "Then we must ensure ours is worth the reprieve, worth every note." As moonlight spilled through the windows of the room they had created together, the Duke and Duchess of Wexford sat entwined, listening to the comfortable silence between them. A silence no longer filled with unsaid words and hidden poisons, but with understanding, connection, trust. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any declaration. The kind that comes only after the truth has found its voice. In the grand ballrooms and quiet drawing rooms of London's highest society, appearances often mask the deepest truths. The story of the Duke and Duchess of Wexford reminds us that pride and misunderstanding can silence even the strongest love, but that with courage and honesty, second chances can restore what seemed forever lost. True connection requires more than titles and perfect appearances. It demands vulnerability, forgiveness, and the willingness to see beyond society's expectations to the person beneath the polished facade. Like our Duke and Duchess, we all face choices between pride and reconciliation, between hiding behind silence and risking the truth. Their journey shows us that the most beautiful harmonies often come after discord, and that love's most authentic voice emerges when we finally find the courage to speak and to listen with our hearts. If you've enjoyed this Regency tale of mystery, redemption, and second chances, please subscribe to our channel for more historical romances that will transport you to worlds of passion, intrigue, and timeless love. Like this video if you believe in the power of second chances, and share it with someone whose heart might need this reminder of love's transformative power. Until our next story unfolds, remember that sometimes the most eloquent truths are spoken in the spaces between words. Thank you for joining us on this journey through silence to restoration. Your support means the world to us,